Hello. We're just about ready to get started. It's always interesting running these events because I tend to know lots of the speakers because I've invited them, obviously. But then I realized that people know different people for different reasons and something like that. So, Kate is a dear friend and a very old friend. We've been to loads of weird conferences and had loads of odd experiences, but she's also, like in some communities, a bona fide superstar of tech worlds. And also, many of you will have seen her work without ever realizing it. If you've ever seen a Twitter bot, for example, there's a good chance that Kate had a hand in making that Twitter bot come to life. The last time I had Kate speak at an event was also the last time I had Tommy speak at an event, which was 9 years ago at ProcJam 2015. And I'm absolutely delighted to have her back today. So Kate, please take it away.
All right, is my mic live for mic guy? Yeah. Okay, so this is, there's a lot of talks that I've given many times, and some of you may have seen some of them, and if not, I'm happy to always point, I used to be kind of the reference librarian for procedural content generation, where people would come to me on Twitter, and then I would be able to direct them onto wherever they needed to go next. So it was a really good place for people to kind of come to you first, and then send you off to whoever you needed to talk to. So I've got plenty of those talks that I can give you. I decided that I was going to do a new talk, which means that this is some new thoughts that I'm working on, and it means that these thoughts are very much under construction. So I hope that you'll enjoy this talk and that you'll get something out of it, and know that this is going to be kind of research-shaped. This is me figuring out what things are. If anybody here is in academia, know that research is the thing that happens in academia and also can happen just whenever you have a question that you're just really interested in. So it is, you can just research. So yeah, like Mike said, I've done many interesting things in my life. I worked on a game called Spore, if anybody's played that. I made Tracery, which was like a weekend project in grad school that ended up running 200,000 bots on Twitter, mostly made by everyday people and artists and kids and weirdos. I do all sorts of like generative masks, generative art bots. I taught for a while at Northwestern. I do a lot of outreach tools. I really care about not only like, oh, me making this stuff, but me being able to explain to other people how to think through this so that I can kind of give them thinking tools. How do you think about this sort of thing in a way that doesn't make it feel like a big tangled mass, but then you're like, ah, yes, it is in fact made out of separate things that I can think reasonably about and then also go to speak to other people about. And yeah, I really like having kind of these deep thoughts and then figuring out what the thinking tools are that lets you use them in different ways. So I coined the term casual creators. This was one of my tools that I came up with, is like the term casual creators for things like Spore, where you're making creativity for its own sake rather than creativity for trying to get some final product out of it. And then I also just often turn these kind of thinking, like intellectual tools into physical tools. So I've got like boxes of ideation cards. I often make zines. If there's any grad students in the office, but it's after lunch, we're all here. If there's any grad students, I really recommend making a zine out of your work. And I, in fact, have a zine about making zines out of your research. If you make a shitty 4-page comic and then you pass it out at conferences, people will start reading your research. And then they'll feel really awkward about citing a little 4-page comic, and then they'll cite your full paper. I got a surprising amount of mileage out of that as a grad student. So my current thought that I'm like, if research is trying to figure out things, all right, Gen AI is pretty powerful. It's doing a lot of stuff. And I need some more thinking tools to think about how to use it. A lot of this kind of comes out of, so 8 years ago, I wrote this blog post. So you want to build a generator. I put it on Tumblr, as you do with all serious academic work. And it was 4,000 words and ended up like kicking off a lot of kind of me being this person that people come to when they're first thinking through this. It turns out I was really good at kind of understanding what it is to make a generator, like what kinds of things cause a generator to be good at its job or bad at its job. What do you have to think about before you make one? What are the tools that are available to you? And so I'm really kind of thinking about like, how do I update this? So that was all in an era before kind of machine learned statistical generativity. What are we missing now? How do I kind of do that same level of service of giving people good thinking tools to understand this? And what problems do I need to solve for folks? Because I don't need to teach you how to build a generator. There's lots of companies that will like give you generators and API access, and it's probably out of scope for you to kind of learn your own giant model, although some people machine learn quite small models off of their own work. So even if you don't want to engage with kind of like the big copyright issues that Tommy was talking about earlier, people do like machine learn their own little models. I'm interested in kind of like, what do we use these things for? So a lot of people thought for decades that like, oh, once I have a big red button and I can push it and get a novel, I'll have one. Who here needs a new novel? Anybody need a novel? Anybody like, I wish I could write a novel, but there's no novels? Yeah, you need a novel, there you go. All right, that gentleman needs a novel. But mostly people just don't need content. So even though we got stuff that can write us a novel worth of text, nobody actually wanted to read it. So I did this talk at Northwestern at their TED. So if you want to see this, you can actually watch my TED talk. But it turns out that the big red button wasn't the win that we expected. So TLDR, if you get a novel generator, you didn't win. So we're hoping that there's something else these things are for. So you can see my TED talk. So it's like, okay, well, what are these things actually for then? First, I'd like to talk, though, about like how do we talk to computers? So when we have a computer or a system, like what are we saying to it? So generative AI has been going on for a long time. Humans use systems to generate art, everything from pottery wheels and spirographs to if statements to computer grammars. So here's a way that you can make fractals. So you take 2 lines, and then you rotate that 45 degrees, and then you draw the lines in between them. And you just kind of keep iterating on that, and you'll eventually get this kind of, I forget the name of this particular dragon, but it's like a little fractal dragon. So this is a series of steps. I don't know necessarily, you can run this exercise with kids in a classroom where you do it with strips of paper, and it's fun because they don't know what the dragon is gonna look like by the end. You've given them a set of steps, they're gonna run that set of steps, and then something is gonna emerge from it. So, a lot of times in this kind of thing, the only way we had to speak to the computer is to express the instructions to follow. There's a reason that we called it procedural generation, because we were following a procedure. Like, our tool was kind of procedure. If you're in the programming languages, it's called imperative programming, which says, imperative, do that, do that, do that, do that, do that. So I'm gonna have to give you a set of steps. Again, really nice because the set of steps may not tell you what it's gonna generate, and so if you make a set of steps, sometimes you'll be surprised with what comes out. That's really neat. And again, we've been doing this for a long time. This is like one of my favorite old examples from somewhere in Athens, and this is, you can see, humans getting really in I think, 2000 BCE, getting really into just like stamping things. And not only stamping things, and this will come back later, notice that they've like stamped a bunch of individual things, and then the guy was like, oh, or person, whoever that was back then, was like, well, I like that I've stamped this design in, but I really want to kind of connect it together. So they've stamped in the repeated designs, and then they've drawn in lines to attach it. So they've kind of already started mixing different sort of procedural generation techniques. The downside of this is that it's kind of frustrating because like if there was actually content that you particularly cared about getting out of this thing, you don't have a way to express that directly. You can only express it kind of in this imperative sense. This was always a big problem for me when I was doing contracting work because I'd be like contracting at Google and they'd be like, so what are you planning to make? And I'm like, I do not know. I'm gonna start making stuff and I'll tell you when the stuff starts looking cool and then you'll find out what you got. So definitely hard to work to spec on this. But again, this meant that we had like quite a number of years of just getting really wonderful surprises. So everything from old 10-print things to strange early computer art from John Whitney. Norman McLaren's piece there is he took a film strip and just like would paint down the film strip. Again, he's not getting to control his final artifact, but he's expressing this process and just saying like, I'm gonna trust that what comes out is gonna be interesting, but I don't get to control what comes out. And of course, there's lots of different crafts that humans have come up with. One of the great things about this is that the output, because you don't control it, ends up feeling a little bit gently alien. So this is how humans create alien artwork for themselves. A human can make artwork that they recognize, but if you use these kind of mechanical affordances, you get something that feels deeply alien. Ask me after the talk for my favorite alien artifact that I found in a Danish museum, and it is deeply alien. So yeah, the downside, well, maybe sometimes we do want to talk about like the thing that we want. So, the solution, you can start like some stuff that's called declarative programming, where you just declare that like this is what I want, and you have to have a system that's willing to give it to you. But sometimes you can also get a little clever about like encoding really good artists into your system. On Spore, we call this the artist in a box. And you have to ask yourself things like, okay, well, what are we trying to make? And then what is that made out of? And like, what makes that good? So we had John Cimino, who is a former animator at Disney. And we had Chaim Gingold, who is the designer on the creature creator for Spore. And he basically sat down and did like a hard sociological interview with John to say, like, how do you work? When you draw a creature, what do you do? And John said, well, first I kind of draw the hot dog of the creature. Maybe I make something that's top heavy or bottom heavy or like long and skinny or like very bulbous. And then I start adding limbs. And then, yeah, they designed that into the finished product, and it was wildly successful. And so they managed, like, Chaim managed to take John and fit him into a box. And then we put the box on a disc, and we put the disc out in stores, and it sold okay. But for a long time, we just kind of enjoyed the surprising emergence. These are a bunch of my works. None of these were where I started out. They all kind of got into different bits. This is actually like a debugging tool that I was enjoying at some point. But I liked the output of the debugging so much that I just kind of like left the work there. So you may have noticed that some things had happened. So some things have happened. So now how do we talk to computers? All right, we made an AI that you can talk to like a person. Congrats. That's great. So how do we talk to people when we're trying to express what we think is good? And if you've ever been to this used to be called, I think, Client Hell, or Clients from Hell. Now it's called Not Always Right, and it's about just people talking to clients. Communication is really hard, even to people. Even when you've got a person who is definitely Turing complete on the other side, it's really difficult to kind of express more than just say, like, well, not like that. Not like that. We've all had kind of our conversations with different forms of generative AI where we're like, yeah, but not like that. And it's very hard to express to it what not like that means. It's a big frontier. Like, what do we need it to understand? And can we do this without just talking more? It's like, okay, if you argue with it for long enough, usually you can get what you want. Do we have a better option here? So I think we need a way to express meaningful things about what we want to generate. As a person who creates art or wants to create art or wants to participate in the creation of art in whatever way you want, you think about, like, what are the constraints? What kind of flexibility we have? What do I care about? What humans do in this situation is we start making up languages. So we make up new words to express what we care about. And this can be everything from words to symbols to constructions. So this is different things that people care about in Mary Had a Little Lamb. And you could also imagine having like a sound wave. A sound wave is another way to write down Mary Had a Little Lamb. If you're playing guitar, you actually care about where your fingers are on the guitar. So the fact that that's a 7 over there, wow, that's deeply weird. But somebody is trying to encode something very important about how Mary Had a Little Lamb fits onto a guitar. Whereas in this one, somebody cares about, like, that there's some much more complicated system of music that they're trying to engage with. Like, this is overkill for Mary Had a Little Lamb, but because they want it to, like, work with that more expressive system, they have to have, like, a little bit of syntactic sugar up there. You have lots of different other music encoding systems in the world. This one, I believe, is in the British the British Library. This is Tibetan music notation. And you can see it's definitely encoding different things that it cares about. There's also what's called visual scores. So visual scores are people expressing music in scores, but, like, what is this trying to encode about music that they care about? So, like, what is he trying to say to a system? And that system, in his case, in 1958, is probably going to be an orchestra or somebody just kind of, like, thinking about this music. But if you were to speak to a computer like this, what would you be trying to say? I always have to put a Yoko Ono thing in everything. So here's another piece of music notation. Again, this is meant to be run on a human. But this is encoding something about what she wants in a piece of music. She's trying to express, like, this is the world's, I hate to call anything by Yoko Ono prompt hacking, but she's trying to prompt hack the viewer. These are wonderful little alien sigils. I don't know if anybody can tell what these are. These are all dance notations. These are from one of my favorite data structures books. This is called Choreographics, and it's just an encyclopedia of different ways that people have written down dance. This one is based on court dances, where they don't particularly care what you're doing with your body as long as you end up in the right place on the floor. So like, they care about different kinds of things. You also have things like LABA notation, where they said, look, the thing that we care about is like what dance really is it's body-centric. I don't care about where you are on the floor, but I want to know that like this is different than this. I want to know that this is different than this. Like I want to speak about stretching and power and force. And so you end up getting kind of notations that look like this. And in fact, people have then used this to then talk to computers about like what gesture is. So you can use these kind of frameworks to say like, look, what do I care about? Like if I care about dance and I'm trying to speak in like vector positions, that's not actually encoding the thing that I care about into the computer. I used to do a lot of swing dancing. Swing dancing is about the force like being pulled between two people. It's not about where your feet are. Your feet are just kind of there. It's like basically a like spring physics simulation. So different kinds of dance will require very different representations. So yeah, I think we need a way to express meaningful things about what we want to generate. And we sometimes call these, depending on what field you're from. Got any philosophers in the audience? Yeah, a couple, yeah. You might call them depending on where you're from, you might call them frameworks. You might call them programming languages. Programming languages are a way for us to express what we care about. You know, regular expressions are a programming language for expressing a very particular thing to care about. Ontologies, sometimes, these all kind of have subtle differences, but really they're all formal ways of saying specific things about important things. So they're specific, and the things that they're saying are important. You know, vector positions are specific, but they may or may not be important. So they're all really a way of saying, like, hey, expert human, because these are all designed by experts. So you don't have a dance ontology made by somebody who's just started dancing. You get the person who is the most possibly skilled at understanding a dance, and you have them design their own language. So you don't design your own language until you really know your stuff. Well, but we have natural language input now. Why do I need to look at that? You know, why can't I just say what dance I want? And it's like, yes, because there are still formal things that we care about. So as hopefully many people have seen this example flying around the internet, you know, if there is a thing that you care about how many R's are in the word strawberry, our current models are not great at maintaining that constraint. Definitely you might see things like, you know, if I generate dance, it may not care about where my elbow is, but I deeply care about that my elbow stays connected. So we may disagree about our constraints. I used to teach programming, and I wanted to have a definition of programming that I believed in, and so I came up with this one. It's the art of fitting human problems into computers so we can do work on them. And that begs the question of, you know, what is your problem, human? We need something that satisfies our need. What's good might not be obvious, right? It's like we saw computer generate Shakespeare for a good 6 years before any of the modern models, right? Did anybody like try to read any of those like kind of Shakespeare textured pieces? They really looked like Shakespeare on the outside, but as soon as you tried to actually understand what the words meant, the words didn't mean anything. And then even by the time they got like words that would kind of hang together, the sentences didn't mean anything. And then after that, like it wasn't saying anything. So it's really easy for it to get texture, and it's really hard. Like especially when we are training these models based on what looks good at first glance. And so I'm like, oh, human auto-turker, please rate these two images about which is good. All right, now human auto-turker, please rate these two novels about which one has meanings that you value in your life. This is like a much more expensive mechanical Turk task. Others might have very particular constraints. You know, we might disagree on what our constraints are, so good picture, good novel, good anything might be very different to you or me. Good dance is going to be very different depending on who you are and what you want. This is why you end up seeing a lot of like these frameworks in intro to writing classes. This is because a framework is really good when you have an expert who is trying to express what good is in a way that might be different in different situations. There's this kind of classic one called Save the Cat, which is explicitly like what is good about plot, but not for everyone, just for very tropey Hollywood screenplays. And they have, in fact, cranked this crank and said, like, oh, wow, we can do, like, what is good for young adult screenplays. We can do it for indie movies. We can do it for, like, you know, young adult novels, all sorts of different things. But they're able to say, like, I have a very concrete sense of a very particular sense of what is good. This is really nice because when you have a framework, you can speak about things that actually matter to you. So again, if you care about your like Save the Cat plot, you have this, look at all this language that they've got, like, okay, you have an opening image, catalyst, all is lost, break into act 2, and there's a lot more kind of like jargony language in there. And then you could say useful things like, well, I'm not saying this screenplay is bad. I'm just saying that like there's a disconnect between the catalyst and the breaking. And what, like, you know, see all the Chekhov's gun for foreshadowing. Like Chekhov's gun is a tool that somebody made to explain a particular way that story can be good. And now that we have Chekhov's gun, we can like talk about that. When you have a new field, you'll end up kind of coining your own. So this is one that I coined, which is the 10,000 bowls of oatmeal problem, which is to say, at least in the old-fashioned generators, you would often get a bunch of generated stuff that kind of, it was all mathematically distinct, but all kind of felt very sameish. This was great because a bunch of other practitioners picked this up and said, hey, we have this problem all the time. This is a common thing that happens with generators. And so now we all have something that we can swear about. It's too fucking oatmeal. Like, oh, this generator, it's a little bit oatmeal-y. No Man's Sky, my blog post came at it about the same time as No Man's Sky, and everybody picked it up and is like, ah, yes, we have a word for the problem that we're seeing here. And we can all agree on what the problem is, and we can kind of have a more grown-up chat about it, rather than just saying, the PCG on the planet is a little disappointing. It's like, well, what do they mean? We now have like a very good framework to describe it. You know, various other people have ended up using this. It ended up in caves of Cud. And then people were able to say like, oh, actually, like, even oatmeal can become an artistic tool. So even a framework of like talking about the problem then becomes an artistic tool to like express what you're trying to build instead. So yeah, the TLDR here is ontologies and other kinds of structured languages, whether you call them frameworks, ontologies, programming languages, dance notations. They're a super way to express things that you care about to the computer if you find a framework that you care about. If you use a framework that you don't care about, if you use Save the Cat and you don't care about Hollywood narrative structure, that's not going to do you any good. But if you find one that like expresses things that you care about, it's really effective. You know, I'm going to kind of skip over what an ontology is, but it's, well, an ontology is really about a way to describe important phenomena. And this is again, I'll kind of keep hammering on this. You're going to lose a lot of the information in your space. You want to be able to capture the important stuff. So none of the dance notations capture everything. They either capture location, or they capture arms, or they capture legs, or they capture distance. You can't have all of it at once. So it's like, it's always going to be a little lossy. I'll kind of, like, I'm a little low on time, so I'm going to quickly go through a couple of my favorite ontologies, just because who doesn't have a favorite ontology here? Again, these are ones that, as a teacher, I often use to explain to an undergraduate student, like, what is good. So I was teaching a virtual reality social spaces class, and I had 275 undergraduate computer science majors and some computer science grad students, many of whom had never taken an art course before. And I wanted to express to them what is a good space. So how are you going to teach them in a way that they can quickly grasp and use, and that is going to cause them to make good spaces? This is the one that I ended up with. It's Origins of Pleasure in Architecture, and they say things like, oh yeah, prospect, where you can kind of see out through things, but like refuge, where you're like kind of enclosed in things. It's like, it's lovely to see out those windows, but if that was an entire glass wall, it wouldn't feel as much like a refuge anymore. Peril, complexity, mystery. This ended up being like, I really like this because for me as a person making bad VR spaces, it's a very actionable little thing. It makes me make good spaces, and it made my students make surprisingly good spaces as well. If anybody's seen this one, this is Kevin Lynch, a sociologist from the 60s. He wanted to know, what is a city in your mind? So like, what makes a city understandable or not understandable? When you get lost, and again, notice that we're talking about problems, and it's useful to have languages to talk about these problems. What is a city made out of so that I never get lost? I haven't gotten confirmation of this, but it's so clear in World of Warcraft that I suspect they designed their levels based on this. And that's why you can't get lost in World of Warcraft, because it's like a literal one-to-one encoding of this. So yeah, there's some World of Warcraft, and you see it, in fact, has landmarks, paths, edges, very strong districts. There's another one that, if you're into meta ontologies, Emily Short has a really great one, very evocative about different kinds of generativity, everything from ones that are like very regulated and very mechanical to things that are like about merging and relating elements. We use Venom a lot. This is when you have like a lot of juxtaposition that's very strange. So we'll, like in my group when we're talking, like in my kind of social group when we're talking about our generators, kind of the ones that we were making aesthetically, we'll often talk about like, whoa, that was a lot of Venom, when it like juxtaposes two very sharp things. Every game is in fact its own ontology. So to make a game, especially a simulation game, is to make an ontology. It is to say that my world is made up of, a sim says that a human is a bag of needs constantly going down, hill climbing towards a fulfillment of that need. That is and then you just kind of run that. So the question then is, are ontologies enough? So structure is good. But unfortunately, a lot of people will end up I used to make a meme that was so you've heard about Vladimir Propp. Vladimir Propp is a guy who wrote a really good ontology of what folktales are. And every computer science interactive narrative student finds this and is like, sweet, I'm going to encode this and it's going to tell stories forever. And then they all run into the same thing, which is yeah, it'll give you a bag of stuff and none of it holds together. This one at the bottom is somebody made a Frank Lloyd Wright grammar. And it turns out if you run it, and it's great for analyzing Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, and if you run it forward, all the rooms are put on top of each other, because they didn't actually have that bit about rooms cannot occupy the same space. So, all right, we need it turns out with a lot of these old things, we need a little bit of chewing gum to combine all the different pieces. Up until recently, we didn't have this chewing gum. You would just have to write increasingly frantic if statements to try to get all the pieces to hold together. It's if these two things are intersecting, if the villain chosen is a dragon, then the poison doesn't work. If the villain is a dragon, then you have to have flying boots, and it just all kind of falls. It's this much chewing gum to connect these two things. Until now, hooray. So now we have all the chewing gum we want. We can make things that it's just I could be okay, connect these two things. It'll be blob. And so yes, you can in fact you can say just generate me a big story, and it will just kind of fill the world with chewing gum. It's great. This is a game called World of Goo, but we are at risk of having a world of goo. So okay, it needs some help with structure. So is chewing gum plus structure enough? Actually, when you need this, you actually need a couple of little recognizable and memorable bits. So it's great, now I have structures that kind of make meaning, I have chewing gum to hold them all together, and then every so often you want to have a little bit of interesting gems. Somebody once described this as a strawberry in the oatmeal. So a little thing that kind of makes the oatmeal a little bit memorable. These are from the British Museum of Natural History, and it just has the world's best gargoyles. I'll skip over that, but so this is my new, this is why this talk has this rather unhinged title, because I'm kind of coming up with this, Kate's universal theory of content and meaning. Let's keep it scoped down a little bit. But this appears to be, fairly reusable. So you have Girders, and it's I just came up with things that, sound catchy together, because that's what makes a good ontology. So you have elements that express and handle structure. So those are your Girders. You have your gum. Those are elements that either fill in space, they can occupy as much space as you need, they can pull two things together, and then you have a couple of gargoyles to kind of add a little bit of character on the top. And we can see this in a lot of both human generativity and then system generativity, where it's okay, you can see the shape of this building. You can see that there's arches, and you can imagine that there's probably some fairly strong iron girders underneath. They've needed just some fill, so it's okay, I'm going to repeat these windows as many times as necessary. I'm just going to kind of flood fill this building with bricks and windows. And of course, you need a couple little bits that make it just seem intentional at the top. Just so you don't think this is just visual, this is also seems to work on things like narrative as well, where this is a work by Aaron Reed, and it's about him kind of choosing which, in an old-fashioned generated narrative, which bits need to be hand-authored and which bits can kind of be chewing gum that's filled in, and which things have to be structurally girders. So which things need structure, which things need connection, and which things need to flex. So this is great because now we have the girders are really good for ontologies, all these frameworks of what do we care about. The gum is really great at statistical AI, and often humans are quite good at gargoyles. So it's if you want to put a hat on your generator, that's great. Or eyes are a really great gargoyle to put on things. No matter what sort of weird generative pile of gum you have, you just put two eyes on the front of it, and now it's a friend. Notice that these are roles and not specific technologies. And I won't get all the way through my end, but I will show you a couple of experiments that you can run yourself. So this is not, in fact, new either. It's I made this tool called Tracery, and it would generate text, but then I needed to get some structure back out of it. So I had this game that I was writing called Hip Chef, which is about running a hipster cafe. And I wanted to be able to say okay, if citrus becomes trendy, does this generated sandwich have citrus in it? And so I ended up like, just adding a little bit of structured text in there so that like when it made its like beautiful kind of soup, I could then extract a little bit of Girders back out of it. If your problem is that GPT stories suck, or GPT whatever you're making kind of, it's getting a little just like flabby, you can give it a little bit more shape. And what shape you give it kind of depends. And so this is a little experiment that I ran I said like, okay, tell me a story. And then I said, Kurt Vonnegut cares about many things in Kurt Vonnegut's writing, but he has this concept of story graphs, where it's like, okay, as an author, I care deeply about like, is this Man in the Hole where you start off high, then you go to a bad place, and then you get high? Is it Cinderella where you start off low and you get high? Is it Odysseus or like Oedipus where you start high and then you like are brought low? And so I had it like re-author this little story in all these different ways, and it did a good job. And like they all had a lot more structure than I was expecting. Then I said, okay, look, we have, let's see, here's Vladimir Prop's journey. So like let's bring Prop out for a new voyage. And I said, okay, well, can you use a little bit of Prop in this, because I want a little bit of hero's journey in here, and can you annotate each step on the hero's journey that you're making? It does quite a nice job. And I said, okay, look, Robert McKee says that in a good piece of theater, every story beat, something has changed. So you never have two people just having a cup of coffee. It's either one of them was starving and is now full, or one of them had information and now the other one has it. Now they've had a fight and their marriage is breaking up. Now information has been changed. Something has to change. So I said, okay, like now you're going to give me what happens in each of these beats and tell me what measurable thing changed. And then I said, all right, give it to me as JSON. So now I'm going to change it back to Girders. So I've gotten the chewing gum to kind of like stretch between all the Girders that I just fed it a lot of Girders. And then, I know I'm over time, but I just want to go Girder shopping because there's a lot of stuff that like, Tommy was showing you a lot of the history of our field. We've got all these old methods. Should we throw them all out and use GPT? No, we should go shopping and see what we can stick together with gum that was never going to work before. Graphs work really well. This is actually a graph generator that I made of like generating a city, but based on kind of Kevin Lynch stuff. So Kevin Lynch talks a lot about like, how is a city navigable? It's all about relationships between things. So I said, okay, great. Tell me like about how, generate me a city, and then tell me about how each bit is navigable in between it. This one is about some work that I did with Max Kraminski et al. At UC Santa Cruz. It was about relationship graphs and making basically a murder mystery inside of a sealed observatory, and everybody has relationships based on what they value. And so you can have some people who value survival, and some people who value science, and some people who value fairness, and they'll all kind of form little clusters based on that. And so that gave us like a really evocative little graph that we couldn't do much about. So it's like, fine, eat this graph. So take this graph and put some chewing gum around it, and then it was able to kind of generate, again, structured moments that I could then reason about. So it's like, I can now reason about, now it's given me a blob of story, but now I can reason about that story, I can control that story. If I want to have more people have more collisions, if I want to have one particular main character who loves science above all, I can steer this thing. So you're giving yourself like really strong, crisp steering wheels rather than just like using the orb to kind of vibe at your GPT until it does the right thing. And then you can like kind of add everything on. So definitely try that yourself. Other great Girders, game data. So do you have a thing where people are doing stuff? This is a really great thing to then like add some chewing gum around. Hidden Door is doing a lot of that. So this is kind of like the vibe of Hidden Door. Is like a little light interactivity, making the chewing gum matter, and then taking that chewing gum and turning it back into nice, crisp UI elements. Physical dice and randomizers. A lot of people have rolled physical dice to get things, so you can like kind of control it in that way. Just because I had to get to tarot decks, I really love tarot decks. They're a really great way to express some very frameworky story bits. So if anybody is into tarot, you know that each tarot card is not just like a dude, a dragon, kind of like story dice I never really got into because it's just like these nouns. And it's like, yeah, tell me a story about a dragon and a hat. Whereas tarot is like, tell me a story about a time when you had vast wealth and you now had to turn around and spend it. Tell me a time about where you overreached and you had to pay the price. So it's a little like juicier story-wise. So the takeaway here, and I'm not too far over time, is that generative AI is really good at chewing gum. And again, this is research. It's happening live. Hopefully I've told a good story here, or at least made you remember 3 deeply bizarre words. It's really good chewing gum. We can go back to a lot of the old girders. We can use a bunch of human-generated content, like adding a little bit of human-generated content. It's really nice because it's like you add that on top to kind of like give it a little bit of like special, unique flavor. Maybe you want to write the kiss scene at the end of your romance novel. Maybe you don't want to figure out how everybody got to the right place, but you do want to like, there's a bit that you actually cared about that it's like, no, I'm going to take the reins on this one. And then the other takeaway is just make thinking tools. This has been very satisfying to me. I used to, during the pandemic, host evenings of recreational ontology, where we would get together and try to understand something and then like write it down in a Miro board, just for fun. It's just like, let's understand what interactive narrative is with like me and my friends. So sometimes it's just fun to be like, you know, if I was going to write like, there's a fantasy book that I love that's about like a retired orc running a bakery. And it's like, if I wanted to be like, okay, I want to run a cozy fantasy Starbucks/high fantasy game, what would be in my ontology for that? Like, what kinds of magic would I care about? Like, what things would I care about in this game? What things wouldn't I care about in this game? Maybe I don't need hit points anymore, but I definitely need like the amount of flour that I have. Or, you know, does the baking cast spells or not? So yeah, just using kind of a lot of these tools from the humanities, and a lot of these frameworks are from the humanities, taking them seriously. Like these are experts who have spent God knows how many decades upon the past centuries of their all the 4 authors of past things, you know, go all the way back to Aristotle and bring Aristotle out for a new ride. Aristotle buds. And yeah, then like kind of bring these back in because they still have things to speak about what is important to the machine, and then again, like when we speak to each other about these things. So yeah, any questions in my -6 minutes? And you can let me know whether or not you think I should add garlic, which is just kind of a general vibe that pervades the whole thing to this, or if that's just getting silly.
Thank you so much, Kate. Don't worry too much. So we do have a little bit of time for at least one question, I think, while our next speaker gets set up. Has anyone got a question for Kate?
Why aren't you so sure about the garlic?
Why am I not so sure about the garlic? Because I think the 3 things has a better cadence. But also, yeah, I'm not sure if it's the kind of general pervasiveness is, it's like, what role does this have? I think it might need to go in because I want to say like, you know, like, here's this like story and it's got a structure, but I want it to be like gently piratey throughout. It's like, it's not going to affect the narrative structure or anything else, but I want it to feel like piratey somehow. So I'm not sure, like I need to talk to people in different fields and kind of, this is the first airing of this particular ontology, and I need to kind of like hand it over to a bunch of people in different fields and say like, does this capture a thing that you care about?
If people wanted to catch up more on your kind of thinking about these sorts of things these days, what's the thing that you tell them to go and see? Is it the TED Talk recently? Is it one of your GDC things?
The TED Talk, but honestly, like I love creative community, so I'm Galaxy Kate at all the things, and now Galaxy Kate at, I think mostly at Blue Sky seems to be where all the cool nerds are hanging out these days. I'll still check my Twitter. So yeah, I think definitely search for Galaxy Kate at anything, and you'll find a huge stack of my talks.
Thank you so much. Let's thank Kate again.